So the Punic War is a war that was fought between the Romans and the Carthaginians, and this war went on for a very long time. It went on over 20 or 30 years. It went on for a very long time, 2-3 decades. That's a very long time for a war to go on. Now, during this war, of course, there was a lot of use of resources. Of course, it's a war. In this video, we are going to look at the human cost of the war on the Roman Republic in particular, because we can figure out how much human cost went into the war on the Roman side. It's hard to tell on the Carthaginian side, but we can assume that they also did incur very high human cost in that war, especially considering that in the end they were the ones that were conquered or destroyed. So it's sure that they did lose a big chunk of their population. Now, when you read Livy's book from the founding of the city, he does describe the war with a lot of detail. And in fact, our modern understanding of the Punic War to a large extent comes from Titus Livius' books. Among his books his book or collection of books is among the few that still exist that to tell us a lot about the Punic War. Now, how we can determine how much Rome lost in terms of human resource to the war is by looking at the census that were carried out in the Republic. Since the times of the kings, I think if I'm not wrong, it could be Servius who set up the system of census. He was, I think, the third, fourth, or fifth king of Rome. So he set up this system where every 5 years, all citizens will be counted to figure out how many people live in the city. And that remained to be something that was done in ancient Rome even after the expulsion of the kings. Now, out of that, we are able to tell how many Romans in particular died during the Punic War. Just before the beginning of the Punic War, or I need to explain this, every 5 years, this census will be carried out, and then a ceremony will accompany it, and this ceremony used to be called the lustrum. Now, the lustrum involves some sacrifices and some prayers and things like that. Now, every 5 years, they will do the same thing, and then they will count the people, and then they will carry out these ceremonies. Now, just before the beginning of the Punic War, there was a census that was carried out that Livy mentions. And he says during this census, there were 262,321 Romans, or 262,321 citizens who lived within the Roman Republic, or citizens of the Roman Republic. Now, the number had increased over the years of the centuries, but it had always remained around 200, 250, 260 is the number that comes up a lot, sometimes 100 and something thousand, but that was the number. Now, Livy does tell us about another census that was done, and this was done as the war was going on, maybe in the middle of the war. And it tells us during this census there were 137,108 Romans. So this is a huge drop from 262,000 to 137,000. Is close to 50% drop of the population. So that means the Romans had lost almost half of the population to the war. As they were at the middle of the war, they had lost close to 50% of the population to the war. Now, Livy also tells us about another census that was carried out. This census was carried out towards the end of the Punic War. Now, this census is interesting because the number comes to 214,000 Romans. Now, that seems like an increase from 137 at some point during the war to 214. That's an increase, and you might wonder why there was an increase and the war was still going on. Now, Livy does provide a reason for that increase, and he tells us that that census was the first census that included people who lived in what they call the colonies of Rome. So it means that for the first time, people who lived or were considered to be colonies of Rome were counted as part of Romans, and they formed part of that number. So we might never know the exact number of the original Romans in that, but we can assume that it must have dropped even further down from 137,000. And these numbers that they picked from the colonies kind of like brought up the number to 214. So we can say that ancient Rome lost more than a half of its population to the Punic War. See you in the next video.